Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast this evening. I'm delighted to welcome David Sleman. So welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much. It's good to finally catch up on video. I know I've been stalking you for a couple of weeks. Had a little chat on the phone a few weeks ago, but I appreciate you coming on and giving up some of your evening. So anyone that doesn't know who you are, you just want to give us a bit of a run through your background, which I know is interesting, education-wise, and what you're currently doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if I start with the business and then kind of work back from maybe how it started. So I'm the founding partner of a company called Elite Performance Partners, and we started out as a search and selection firm in elite sport. So placing hopefully a lot of the type of people that you get on your podcast. Prior to setting up that business, I'd worked for 4 years in a search firm outside of sport. It was called Miramar. They're brilliant guys across energy and chemical sectors. But prior to that, I played rugby professionally. So grew up in Liverpool, would have loved to have been a better footballer, but wasn't. So moved into rugby, played professionally for 10 or 12 years, scrapping around, getting contracts, but, hung in there as a lot of people do. And then coming out of that, moved into search. As everybody, as a lot of ex-athletes, not knowing what they want to do next or not knowing what's possible. I wouldn't say I fell into search. I did give it a fair bit of thought after a couple of years of transitioning out from playing semi-professionally, and then ended up, as I say, founding this company, and that was 7 years ago.
So when you say rugby union, you mean? Yeah.
Rugby union, yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm from the Northwest, so I do still like rugby league. So never played it apart from occasionally on when I played at Orrell. So we're in Wigan. So, we'd normally warm up with a game of rugby league, which suddenly would get very physical very quickly. It's quite good fun.
And when you say search, people would sometimes term that as recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is recruitment a dirty word, which is why you use search? Or is that
not at all. Okay. No, it's just
cool.
habit. It's just habit. Yeah. I think there are different types of recruitment, and we probably bridge the gap between, if you go from players, we don't represent players. In fact, we don't represent anybody. The whole point is that there is an agent mentality still in sport to a degree. In fact, I saw one of the questions was around that. And nicely teed up to that. And so, and there is kind of contingent recruitment, which would be success only. You maybe put it out to a few people, and whoever places the candidate will get the role. The way search works, which would be more kind of executive search, headhunting, whereby you'll work with a club, with an organization, you'll help develop a brief, or you'll be given, we want this, and then you'll go away and, map the market, present a short list of 4 to 6 candidates against a certain criteria. And so you're basically tapping people on the shoulder who aren't looking as well as the people who are. Because, 20 to 30% of the people are actively looking, and some of the roles will be advertised, but quite a few won't. Tend to be the more senior people that won't, but a big part of what we really enjoy is that, if we say call them mid-level roles, so not just the most senior roles, is finding the right cultural fit for organizations and the people out there who maybe deserve a chance sometimes. So, headhunting, search, recruitment's fine. Selection, I say search and selection because we've moved into recruiting coaches and
technical coaches, you mean?
Yeah. Yep. So we place football coaches. So with the FA, the likes of Phil Neville, Steve Cooper at Swansea City, those sorts of roles. We've got a partnership with 21st Club for data analytics. So putting together the subjective and objective information. And that is more a case of aligning people within clubs who might say they want one thing, but are actually meaning very different things. So, but that's selection because, in those two examples, there's actually a book on who's going to be next. So most of the candidates are known, but we will actually be that independent view to go, well, what do you actually want and why? And what does success look like for you? So the business has grown from being search and selection to realizing that actually every recruitment role is not in isolation. There's a piece before it about making sure you do know or have agreed on what success looks like, what's the gap to get there, who's in the building already. We've talked ourselves out of work quite a bit. So you realize he's really good. You don't need to go and find somebody else, just promote him or put support around that person. And then at the other side, the third part of our business is recognizing that, no one's more than an 80% fit against a brief, and everyone can develop. And so we've got kind of a leadership development piece to our business to make sure that that support's given to.
When you say there's a book and people know what's coming next, is that from that's where you had like a head coach job? People have a successor and a successor after that, depending on the plan of the club? No,
I just mean more in some roles. We might, so the FA would be a good example. You might go, we want very specifically somebody who's got a certain breadth of experience, who has done X, Y, and Z, who's culturally come from this sort of environment. And sometimes when we say cultural fit, it might be the exact opposite of what's there. So cultural ad's often a better phrase, but that's a search because they don't know what they don't know. They're happy to be surprised, and you're kind of sometimes playing devil's advocate. If there's 5 criteria on a brief, not everybody, 80% we say, is because nobody typically is more than 4 out of 5. Excuse me. There's normally one that they're not as strong on, and that's okay. And as you go through things, it goes from being a hypothetical situation to, oh, these are real people. Look, oh, they're human beings. They're fallible. They make mistakes, And so the point about the head coach piece, typically head coaches, is that they're well known. And within certain sports, they maybe play the game particularly well. So experience will be overvalued. It's very hard to get a first role. People very rarely, diversity is a big thing, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah.
And the fact is, you can't, if you get people overvalue experience, therefore you're never going to get diverse candidates if they've never been given a chance further down the line. So to hire for diversity, you have to hire for potential. And I think the way we go about that and the criteria-based approach hopefully allows that. But typically for head coaches, people know, most people, and people have a view. And it's just about unpicking it sometimes to go, why do you think that? Oh no, and so that's and that's where 21st Club's really good. So it might be, they play a lot of young players, and we go, well, they don't. They don't.
Yeah.
Or they play a really attacking style, or like, well, they don't on the whole. So it's just giving a bit more information and hopefully having that information in an objective way. So it's never objective, really. Everyone has their biases, but I think people get hijacked by their emotions a lot when it comes to the senior coaching role. So that's why we separate the two. So search is, you're allowed to go out there, you map a market, you're a bit more open, whereas selection would be more people will be known. And it's just fine tuning exactly what you need, and actually what you need on the wider team and the support around it, because it's never about one person. And the sooner you can realize that, the better, really. A hero leader is very prevalent football, but it's happening in rugby. It happens in most sports, actually.
That's interesting that clubs get tagged with, or they bring youth players through. They're this type of team, this type of club, where you have to put a reasonable amount of objectivity to it, and you're like, that's a tag they had 10 years ago, and it's still running on. Things have changed. Like, they've had 7 managers since then. Lots changed in the club. So that's interesting.
But also to that with a coach is they may have played youth players, but why? So you still have to interview them based on the metrics that you have, because the data alone doesn't give you all the answers. So we've had some examples where, this guy looks like he has played a lot of youth players, and I was going to say it is, but it's like, I didn't want to. We didn't have any cash. We had no choice. We had to play the academy guys. And you're like, oh, right. So if you were going into this environment now, you wouldn't play the academy players. You don't have a development mindset. Your coaching philosophy is more almost win at all costs, as opposed to how it appeared. And so that nuance is quite important. And people change, and people need to be allowed to as well. You can pigeonhole people wrongly. And the best part of our job on the recruitment piece is when somebody does surprise you, or when you go, do you know what? I thought they were going to be this, and they're not. They're that. And it's like, brilliant. And then when somebody else agrees, that's a good moment.
I think it's, and like I said to you before, and this is not just saying this because you're here and we're speaking now, but I've been really looking forward to this, because it's an interesting area for me personally. And I think what is great to have reason to have you on is you come in from the other side. You've got input from a knowledge of what clubs do want from a performance support roles, rather than probably my side and the practitioner side going, clubs don't understand this and managers don't understand that, and you're coming from the other angle. Well, we do. we want this, this, and this, and you think we want this, this, this. So I think it'd be really interesting to get into this. But one thing I wanted to kick off with was something that you spoke about recently about the specialist-generalist. I was going to say it around then.
Well, that still works, I think.
Yeah, the specialist-generalist and the rise of that within professional sport. Would you be able to give us a bit of a rundown on your thoughts around that and why you think that may be the case?
Yeah, sure. So I guess how we would define a specialist generalist is somebody who, you would typically have a specialist would be somebody who, as the name gives it away, really, somebody who specializes in one specific thing. And then your kind of depth of experience will be in a specialism. And so the typical T-shaped person, so you'd have a breadth of softer skills, and that'll be more leadership skills and communication and those sorts of things. And then the depth will be in a specialism. So whether that's player monitoring, GPS, a certain type of analysis, maybe a physio, that sort of thing. There's a recognition that, we can talk about why this came about, because it's really about getting the best out of the resources you have, is suddenly going, well, there's now a need with smaller teams to be able to do more than one thing, to be able to lean in to a multidisciplinary team, to adapt and be agile. And what we're seeing is if you want to develop, and there's two specific examples of where this works and where it can be seen as an obvious example is you can see analysts who are moving into coaching, and vice versa. So coaches who can now code and can bring their own clips. And some of the older guys, it's a big moment. I think of one club we work with who was super proud of their kind of 60-year-old coach who cut some clips, and it was horrible, but the fact that he'd done it was a big step, and the fact he was willing to learn, made such a big difference to the analyst who was working with him, and so it can work that way. You can work analysts the other way, and the S&C and physio piece. So we've recently hired a couple of physios, and they need to have an understanding and a coaching mindset. So the idea that you look at David Epstein's book Range, there's a move towards kind of deep generalisms. So, and it's quite important for careers. So instead of just focusing and getting more and more deep into an area, academically, maybe going, master's, PhD, not there's anything wrong with that, Jesus. It's a great thing to be doing those things, but just to recognize that breadth of understanding of having a breadth of experience across departments, if you want to move up to a leadership position, is really important. And I think it's really, so yeah, that's what we see in the market. There's definitely a move towards it. And I think it's also the big pieces around the education of specialism and generalism. And it's even quite derogatory the way it's called, as though, specialisms are special and generalisms almost everybody has. Whereas what we see in the best people, that is fundamentally completely wrong. So the specialist skills might be the skills that get you the minimum qualifications to be suitable for a role. But the general skills are the leadership traits that you have either got or more likely developed that will separate you out from the rest of the candidates. And yeah, so I can go into that in a lot more detail and explain it out, but that's where that kind of has come from over the past. It's come through lockdown and through COVID, but it's not really a COVID thing. It's just, well, it is because of the situation, but there's more to it than that. I think it was a trend that was happening anyway.
That's interesting, because as soon as you started talking, then my head goes, that's for a smaller club. That's for a smaller club. But you're seeing that happening in bigger clubs as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Not that, and this isn't undervaluing specialists and not saying they're not important. We are seeing teams more open to using consultants as opposed to having people full time. Okay. So a slightly more fluid, agile way of doing things, whereby, so we had a call with Mo Bobat, the ECB, performance director for the ECB, and they were talking about going to the World Cup, and they weren't going to be allowed to take that many people. So or not the normal size of their team. So how do you bring somebody in that is has a specialism that would be really valuable in the tournament, and how do you integrate them in, and how do you make sure that the team integrates them and that everyone's comfortable and you hit the ground running and you can go. So of course there are still bigger teams who don't need to specialize, who don't need this approach, but it's still, irrespective of the current world situation, there is always a need to just look at what you're doing. And I think there's less acceptance of wastage now. People are genuinely going, well, hold on, do we really need 4 analysts and 5 fit? There is definitely people looking at that. So I think and we've even had a situation where, we run leadership forums, and we've had a senior person from a Premier League team who was really excited about the changes that were going to come because it was stuff that needed to happen. And then the Premier League money came in, and it's like, I really hope we still do that, because that allows you to be not lazy. That's unfair, but maybe a bit complacent. And so, yeah.
So do you think the consensus is, and that person you mentioned there, that support teams have got too big, especially at the top end, and COVID and the, obviously not a good situation globally, but within performance sport, that's making people look at what they've got and potentially a good excuse to trim back and almost reassess what they do and they don't need?
It's funny. It is an opportunity to do exactly that, but why aren't people doing that all the time?
Yeah.
So you've always got to get the best out of the resources you have. And the way we look at every role that you have is a chance to take time. Well, whenever we work on a role, it's not, okay, so right, who's going to fit? You got to take your time, and it might sometimes feel like a luxury, but it's absolutely not. It's a time to go, just take time to understand, I guess, a few things. Who's in the building? What skills and capabilities do we exist now in the building? What are the pieces that we don't have, that we may want or need? And I guess that's both in the moment of looking at what's needed now in the sport, but it's also looking at what might be needed to win in 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years. It might, if you look at the Olympic model of, what it takes to win now compared to 4 years' time will be different. So how do you do that? Team sports it's not such a natural process, I think, for team sports, but it's equally applicable. How do you bridge the gap from now to the future? And then where do you get your inspiration from? So where you decide to look at other sports, geographies to get that thinking. And the fact is that roles do move on. So hopefully people can develop. I'm not saying that you should change people every year or two. People develop in the roles too. Squads change. And so when we do it, we always look at the now, but we look at the future too. So what does success look like? What's the vision of where you want to get to? And then if you can align people to that, you suddenly get a much more kind of tighter and more considered brief to understand the kind of size and shape of the gap if you're looking at a person. But I think the challenge is, why don't people do this all the time? And hopefully COVID's, it's not ideal, is it? But there's an understatement for you. But it should allow people just to go, take a moment. We should do this every time, because it gives us an opportunity to audit maybe not the best word, but it gives us just to reflect on where we are as a group and where we want to get to.
Is it just a human thing that we add? And this is a bad thing to talk about something that's human, but we hoard stuff. We like to collect things. All of a sudden, 2 members of staff becomes 4, 4 becomes 6, 6 becomes 10. You're like, how did this all happen? It's just we all got a little bit excited because we got promoted, or we've got some investment, or whatever it may be, without actually, like you say, considering the realities of what we actually need and where this is setting us up to go.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And equally, you don't want to get too big if people then don't have enough to do. I mean, you'll always find things to do. You'll always fill the gap. If you've got a day to get something done, you've got a week. It'll take a week. Yeah. And so it's a very good point. And it's not just a sport thing. Every industry that grows becomes more specialist. You look at the technology sector specifically has grown exponentially, and so you now get very, very specialist people in technology broadly. And I think sports now at a moment where it's been growing and it's now obviously shrinking, and people are not being allowed to waste. And I guess there's fewer roles. Therefore, the reasons why people have them, and what they're going to do in those roles has to be really scrutinized. Scrutinized is a harsh word, but it does have to be, okay, what are you actually going to do? And what impact are you going to have on the athlete or on the team or on the environment or on the culture? You've got to decide what your priorities are. I think teams are poor at that, in terms of, okay, well, what have we decided are the most important things for our club? And you can't prioritize everything because every team wants to win with the best players and pay them the least. That's a given. Everybody wants to win, but it's not win at all costs, because that's not really winning, is it? It's like Jack Nicklaus. And so you've just got, prioritizations are key for us in deciding, what you want to be really good at.
Yeah. Let's have a little chat around consultants, because you mentioned it there.
Yeah.
So is that a strategy for some clubs to, yes, they are having to reduce the numbers of staff, whether that be now or seeing contracts out in the near future, to go down that route?
It's really tough. I think it's tough on two sides. It's relatively, if you've got, it's hard to generalize actually, because I'm suddenly thinking like 3 or 4 different sports who would do this differently. But if you have a performance director model, or a director of football, director of rugby, somebody who is not the coach running a department, being involved in a performance department, this model, you've got somebody who's got the time to maybe develop a network of consultants who can really unpick the different performance functions, recognize what people you need there full time, recognize where the gaps are to get to where you want to get to. And when you just need, nutrition would be one that would be one area, wouldn't it? That not always somebody's full time, although the behaviors you might need to change, you might need somebody in there a bit longer at first. Similar with psychology. I never quite understand why psychology would be a consultant and S&C or physios aren't. I never quite understand that model, but I think if you are a coach-led sport, which is still a lot, it's very difficult to do this efficiently. It's also equally hard on the other side. If you move, and we know a lot of people, and a number have been on your podcast, of people who've gone from being a practitioner to a manager of a team of something they've done, to maybe a leader operating, technical director, or kind of a head of performance, managing a team of teams. So also managing the people who have expertise they don't have. And often people will pop out, salary being one reason, and there's an opportunity to do their own thing. But you suddenly have to run your own business. And it's a completely different skill. And it's a passion that you probably didn't have. You probably were passionate about performance and about a sport and about health. You don't want to generalize too much, but I see people really struggling with that, because it's really hard for, you might, consultancy model is good, but sport isn't necessarily that set up for it. Because how do you, people might still go with their mates who they know, but it is, I think, I do feel for people. I hope that there will be a model where people can earn more money doing it, can get a diversity of experience across sport for their expertise. So I think it's a good thing for a lot of people, but it's a bit riskier. So yeah, it's tough.
Mm-hmm. One thing you've mentioned a couple of times there, and one thing we spoke on the phone about the other week, was cultural fit.
Yeah.
And you fired me a PDF, which was part of the presentation that you give to leaders.
Yeah.
And cultural fit was at the top. Cultural fit was identified as the most important thing when doing a search. Is that right?
I don't want to say it's always the most important thing. Okay. It's always it's the only one that is always one of the 5 criteria that we'd use.
Okay.
So the thing that I shared with you was, we obviously had a lot of time in lockdown, because we went from like 14 searches to 0 in like a week. So we spent a lot of time, my business partner Anna and I, sitting down and going, right, of all the searches we've ever done, and there's a lot, because we would go back a number of years, a good couple of hundred. We're going, well, let's break down the criteria and see if we can break them down into like distinct buckets. And there was hundreds of different ones, but we realized that we could break them down into 9, only 9. So of all the searches that we'd ever done, they only fitted into 9. And what's really interesting is that, and this is good, I guess, for you from going from practitioner to leader, is only 3 of them were involved with technical skill. There's only 3 that were technical, and the other 6 were all more kind of leadership skills or capabilities. So that in itself is interesting, when most people spend their education focusing on the technical piece, and yet where they really need to spend it is on the other part. But cultural fit is the one that we always put in, because in the same way, as I said before, things can change and organizations can change, and the cultures within them and their values and the people within them can change too. You've got to cultural fit is just what's it like in that environment and what sort of people will thrive in it, because, it's really clear that, you can transfer knowledge, you can gain experience, you can develop skills, but you cannot thrive, I believe, in an organization where your values aren't shared or aligned. You just can't. And we've seen people go in and they know they're going into organizations that they don't quite fit with, but it's a good role, it's well paid. And they go in with their eyes open, and it never lasts, because it's just exhausting trying to be something you're not. And so that's the cultural fit piece.
So how do you gauge that in a search without getting to know the potential candidates on a deeper level than what you're presented with when you're doing the search?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Just hold that.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yes, there we go.
Cool. No worries. I think it's a really good question about how much do you get to know somebody? How well can you get to know somebody in a short period of time? And I think there are ways that you can do it. And you have to speak to them more than a couple of times. Don't want to give all our tricks away, but there are definitely ways to do it. And there are ways of asking questions that can get to the heart of somebody and what people are like. And, because if you look at, say, job descriptions, they'll have 25 or 30 pieces to it. And nobody in the world can ever do all of them, but they still are run that way. And you also can't assess against that. So the reason we have 5 is that you can assess against 5 things, and you would ask questions that are directly fitted to those. So what we do, the other side of it is the brief that we write at the start is very clear as to what the values of the organization might be, or what the culture is like, and what they want in an organization, or what the hiring manager or the leaders there want in this person, or what type of traits they want, what behaviors they like to see, what standards they set. And that's what we try and unpick. And sometimes it's not always agreed. It's kind of, and also these are human beings, so give them a break. They're not everybody's going to get this right every time, but everybody knows. Everyone goes on about the All Blacks and the no dickheads rule as if they're the only team in the world who has that. There isn't a team who doesn't, really. There might be teams who give a bit of flexibility to the better players, and that's the reality of it. And maybe the better people, which they arguably shouldn't. But you can assess against cultural fit, because it's about behaviors, it's about standards, it's about, to what we were talking about at the start, it's about the people a bit more deeply. And the secret is to get them to tell stories about themselves, because that is how you do it.
Okay, interesting.
Because the stories that you tell yourself tend to be the person that you become. Yeah. And I think, if you had to ask one question to somebody, I got asked this recently, which is why it's front of mind, is that somebody said, if you could ask only one question of somebody in an interview that would give you the best feel for somebody, what would you ask? And I gave it a lot of thought. And the question I'd ask is just tell me what it was like growing up, because don't want to get too Freudian on it. But the fact is that people then start telling stories about themselves, thinking about themselves as a child. And it is unbelievably telling about what somebody is like and where they've ended up.
Fascinating. So when you mentioned about the technical skills being only 3 out of the 9, if you were doing a search for I don't know how you term it, but lower end practitioner rather than the medium level, higher level, would that technical go up in terms of what the influence that it has on that position? Or are you just looking at the technical as not to sound too simplistic with this, but you're ticking the box in terms of the technical, But what you're actually searching for is the person who do the 6 things.
Yeah. It might, I think if you look at the roles that we do, and we would tend to do the more senior ones. I really enjoy the mid-level ones, as I say.
What would be mid-level, David? What would mid-level?
Mid-level would be kind of say an S&C coach at a club, or a senior S&C coach, not a head of function. So the one below, so a practitioner, somebody working on the ground, in the trenches. That would be not an entry level position on the whole, because they don't get paid enough to pay a fee to a search firm. Is the honest answer. And also, you can get, if you advertise, there are so many people who might be doing it. You're still going to have to do the work to filter them, and arguably, it makes as much sense to do it to use a search firm at that point, because there's so many people who could be right, and it's the softer skills that you're looking for, and it's the leadership traits or the things that aren't as obvious on CVs. But the reality of cost means that often, and for both sides as well, as much as we would love to do that, we're not a charity, so we still got to actually run the business, and I think it's just not cost effective too, as much as we do like to do as much of that as we can. And I think, to your point, there would tend to be, if you're looking at the senior roles, there's still kind of minimum qualifications that you've got to get on to be on a long list, but to then get on the short list, it will be often some quite specific things. So the 2 physio roles we did recently there was a technical skill, because there was a gap in kind of neck and shoulder rehab they didn't have, which is so that was one of them. It wasn't absolutely the most important thing, but it was one of the 5. And then you had kind of coaching philosophy. So the mindset they needed to, how they looked at S&C and how they looked at rehab was the club did it in a very specific, well, not very specific, but they had a club philosophy. And if you didn't align with that, it would be very difficult to fit there. And so what we do quite a lot of is we tend to go to people blind. So we don't tell them the role, we don't tell them the club, because we want to know what the people would really love to do, because we want to know what the truth is. Because if you go with, I don't know, if you use football as an example, if you went and said, I work for Man City or I work for Liverpool or whoever it might be, people will start maybe telling you what they think somebody who works at Manchester City should be. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's quite an often unconscious, sometimes really not, thing to do. And so we just go, we want to make sure it fits for you. And so we just ask, what's your ambition, what you want to do? And then if it sounds like this could be a good fit, that's when we then tell you who it is. Because so that's kind of the approach. I don't know if that actually answers the question, but
no, it does. Yeah, it does. I mean, it absolutely does. And I've just got a note here about the COVID situation. I just want to bring it back to that. I know we've touched on that a little bit, but what kind of effect has the last, I don't even know how many months it is, 8, 7, could be 70 for what it feels like. But what actual effect has that had on how people are going about things from a recruitment point of view? Has it been the kind of top level clubs seem to be carrying as normal, and the bottom level clubs or the lower level clubs are slowing down? Is there from the top end, like, we've got these people, but we can't really ship them out, so we've got to kind of see the contracts out and do it slowly? Because obviously, if you Arsenal did during lockdown, we're going to announce so many redundancies. It doesn't look great from an organisation perspective. So how are you seeing clubs deal with COVID?
It does vary, and I think
that
what
was
is
a very
true.
General question, sorry.
No. It's good. I think what we have seen, though, that will be true, irrespective of COVID, is whatever the crisis would be, is that what is true is that the teams that are well run with good leadership have coped better than the ones who have got poor leadership and are poorly run. So that has been true, and I think we've seen that through this. And there is, the kind of old adage, never waste a crisis. This has given people a chance, or a moment when people can have a chance in what are often quite traditional environments to do things differently and to challenge the status quo. Because, if you're not going to do it now, when are you going to? And I think there has been some positivity in the sense of, well, let's do it. Let's have a go. Why not? And so that it just kind of stuck with me. Never waste a crisis, because I think it does mean that it's a time to reflect in a lot of sports when it's so fast paced and there's games every week and you're on the treadmill and you're in a very comfortable season to season environment. You know what you're doing in June. You know what you're doing you know, whereas this year you don't. And I mean, I don't feel too sorry. Sports relatively at the top level hasn't changed that much. If you look compared to some industries, if you work in the hospitality industry, you're like, yeah, you're fine in sport. Speaking to somebody yesterday, probably the players are in the bubble. It's not actually the bubble, not just their own bubble. And so it's they're not too bad, but I think it is an opportunity. And what we've seen, some clubs being a bit more reflective, and we've grown the other parts of our business quite considerably too, because we were quite comfortable just delivering searches, and we've realised that what we love doing is the advisory piece of really helping clubs think in a bit more depth about what they're doing and where they're going. And then to the point before, the development of people and people's potential is what probably I get out of bed for, and what I enjoy the most. So we've grown that part of our, we kind of in March to like, well, what would we regret not doing if it's going to be 6 months? Didn't think it'd be 9. It's going to be a year probably. But what would we do? And we absolutely have done things differently. So I think we're not alone.
So that part of the business is putting someone in a club, in an organisation, but then being there in an ongoing capacity to develop that person, work with the club where they need to develop leadership, technical skills, whatever it may be. Is that right?
So the leadership piece is there's 3 different parts to it. There's a one-on-one coaching piece. So we've got kind of a coaching mentoring part. So we've got people we work with as partners to help mentor individuals. We've also got, I know my business partner is a qualified coach, so we've got certain people that we're coaching. We've got kind of bespoke coaching with clubs of a kind of development of staff, where they kind of go on it and we share some stuff of best practice across different areas. And then we have leadership forums where we invite people from across sport onto it. And because what we've realized is that a lot of people go into organizations, even the most senior people. The leadership forum came out of the last 4 or 5 years of us scouring the globe to find the best people to place in roles, and the work that goes into that. And then you place them and they just get left really to their own. And it's not a criticism really, because there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of work that they need to do, but they don't get to develop because often if they're the more senior leaders, they're lonely or they're isolated, And so what we've created is an opportunity across sport, so there's no potential conflict, just to have a chat with somebody who's in the same position as you. And we've seen in lockdown, it's been great of people just going, oh, did you? Oh, so glad to hear that happened to you, because that happened to me. And oh, you're doing it that way. Oh, brilliant! I didn't think of doing it that way. And so that kind of peer-to-peer learning. Learn from each other's mistakes. 6 heads are better than 1 kind of approach, and it's been nice to be kind of part of that. And I think it's the way forward, actually.
So is that just people that you've placed, or is that externals as well that you're bringing in as extra expertise to join these groups? Is it just from clubs that you're working with? How does that piece together from a business point of view?
It was, I think we maybe placed 1 of the people in it. It was just people that we knew in the set. It were people who were learners, who wanted to be, who we'd got to know quite well. Because it's the first one, I said, this is what we're thinking. And they're like, yeah, we'd love to be a part of that. And so you never quite know, do you, how it's going to go? And then, and so we the people we chose were all open, curious, humble, willing to learn, and I guess trusted us as well to do it. So they didn't know each other. I think there was 1 by chance on the first Zoom call we did. Like, oh, how you doing? Oh, you didn't. But apart from that 1, there was no one. So it's something we'll roll out across. We'll probably do coaches next, because I think coaches are the ones that maybe, and they were a mix of people, of senior leaders. There's 1 from S&C that was just, and it's, I think just getting that mix right is really important. So yeah.
There are people listening to this thinking, Dave's going around, he's meeting all these cool clubs who've got all these cool positions. He's contacting all these coaches. But where does he get the numbers for the coaches? Who does he actually go to? How does he know who to go to? And more importantly, how can I be one of the people that is on that list of people that may be contacted for roles. So where do you? I know this is potentially giving away the secret sauce.
No, it's not.
But where do people go to be on that list of those considered?
I think to put some people's mind at rest, we say that we start it's not kind of like we've got a list, and if you're not on it, you're not on it, and it's not like that. I think we spend a fair amount of time. We do start from scratch, everyone. Of course, there are people that when you start search, but that's why when you look at kind of a brief that you write with the club and you help shape that, each one is different. So yeah, we spend time to get to know the club, to get to know the role, to agree what's the most important things. And then there will, however, be a minimum requirement, whether it's a sport experience, whether it's a number of years of doing a role. There will be something that you'll have to, cut it down somewhere to decide what the market is. And how do you get on there? It's difficult to generalize, but a lot of people do call us up though, and it's a funny one because we don't advertise roles, so we're a search firm, so we do go and tap people on the shoulder, but we still, having said that, you still need to know a lot of people in the market, so we still spend quite a lot of time going to events, checking what people are saying on social media, which isn't always good, by the way, and
we'll come to that.
And we would have done a big search, a physical performance role, and we would have, I would have looked at see who'd been on your podcast and go, and I ended up listening to them and then speaking to them, and so there's a lot of ways you can do desk-based research. You do source extensively, so you get to know very senior people, and the best people are often associated with other good people. So that's a really good way to, we're not true experts. We're not on the ground every day coaching. So you need to, you triangulate effectively. You go from desk-based, you go from sources, you go from your own interviews. And, if you're on your way through a career, and also from desk-based research, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Google, whether it's club websites, whether it's your own personal profile out there, you can get a lot of information, more than people realize, actually. So people need to be careful. And so, yeah, and I think, how do you get on it? Just send a polite message saying, can we have a chat? And that's typically the way,
Yeah.
And we want people who are ambitious and want to reach their potential to do well. That's all we want, really. And, and we do. And of course, we haven't got a huge amount of time to speak to everyone. Of course we don't, but we'll do our best to have a chat to let you know. And there won't be that many roles that we actually end up recruiting for, but yeah, we're still happy to have a chat,
Let's chat around this social media thing, because it's what we spoke about a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing this. So the first place you go, like anyone goes when they're trying to find someone's name who works at a certain club. Same thing when you're doing a search. You're going to go on Twitter, Instagram, see what people are writing, go on podcast, listen to podcasts, read blogs, whatever it may be, to get a feel for these people. I'd be interested to see have people been ruled out because of social media presence? How they've been coming across? Yeah, okay.
Of course, absolutely, of course. And it's really naive to think that people wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because we've seen, if you were to say what's the most important trait in a kind of potential leader or in the better people, I'd put self-awareness pretty high. And I think, if you don't realize the impact it's having on you, of you calling somebody out or sort of complaining or taking a view, even if you're right, it doesn't really matter. If you're open to criticizing somebody online, you've got to realize that if you're going to do it publicly, there's every chance you're doing it privately too. Of course. So yeah, of course it is. I'm not saying it definitely does. And I think we'd always try and give benefit of the doubt to, if there's one thing that somebody did, and I think people get ruled out really quickly. So you've got to be careful and you've got to try and take it in context. But yeah, of course, when you've got to narrow it down to only one role and one person will get a role, if there's a reason to rule people out, you actually do need some. So
such a big pool.
So yeah, absolutely.
Big pool.
Yeah.
Few jobs.
Yeah.
Easy to check someone off with
Yeah.
a few abusive tweets on Twitter.
Well, yeah, of course. And I just think if we're looking at the softer skills, and if self-awareness and emotional intelligence are two of them, there's some people who are clearly showing a lack of both of those things.
Yeah.
And not that there's anything wrong with being passionate. And I guess any strength overplay can be a weakness. So it doesn't mean that you can't, tame that or rein it in a bit. And we want passionate people who care. People who care is also massively important. But yeah, I think to the direct question, does it rule people out? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Just thinking about different sports, and you obviously work across different sports, and probably 10 years ago, if you worked in football, you were staying in football. If you worked in rugby, you were staying in rugby. That's changing. People are moving from rugby to football to rugby, Olympic sports, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where do you see the land lie when it comes to that? Is that still happening? Are people still very, or even more, happier to look outside of their sport? And is that a positive thing? Could that be seen as a potential negative thing? What's your feeling? What's your feeling with that?
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, and the way we look at it, it's overwhelmingly positive. If you've got people who are curious, who want to learn, who are willing to look outside of their comfort zone or their specific sport, not to say that somebody who's been at a club for 10 years hasn't got a real breadth of experience and diversity of understanding of different people and different environments, but 10 years experience is very different to 1 year 10 times. And I think we do look, when you look at if you were to look at like, we call it a cone now, so you've got more generalisms in the teeth, and then you've got the overarching handle would be the softer skills and the leadership traits. But we'd also look at kind of breadth of experience and the high performance culture. The environment really does dictate behavior. And I think the more that you can be in, the better. So if you look at somebody like a Bryce Kavanagh, who we placed at the FA, he would have gone from, when we first found his profile and he went on the long list. I know he got the role, so this is maybe hindsight, but you look at him and you go, he has gone from Aussie rules to West Indies cricket to Munster rugby. Now, I can't think of, specifically Munster and West Indies cricket, two more different environments. And I would say for anybody going through, so I would imagine he'd have quite an interesting balanced view, and he'd be fairly reflective, and he is. And I think early on in your career, if you can, it's difficult, I guess, when you get a bit older and you have families, but if you can go and experience a different environment, a different sport, maybe a different culture, and realize that there are different ways to do things. Because I think people do get set in a certain way of doing stuff. And especially, football gets a bit of criticism wrongly. I think a lot of other sports are as bad, of this is the way we do things, And I look at just my experience of playing rugby in the Premiership in England and then going to Ireland and it being so different. I mean, and I was so arrogant that we did it the right way in England. And then you go to Ireland and you realise, and it worked better for me there. And you're like, and I think that's absolutely true of a practitioner. And if you're planning a career, and I think you absolutely should, a lot of people don't, and they're happy with that, and that's fine. But, you need to go on a journey, and that's an actual journey to develop those skills. And you don't have to, of course you don't. But yeah, we'd be big advocates for people trying their hand at different things. And it does stand out on people's CVs if it's as a starting point.
How do people go about planning a career? What would be the first step? Have you seen people do that really positively or really well in the past?
Yeah. I guess if you look at kind of closer to the start, I think one of the keys is not to specialize too early, or not to be. Of course, you can have a specialism, but don't be wedded to, say, one philosophy or one sport or one person. I mean, you want mentors and you want people that you can call on and to get advice from, and you'll have people who are further ahead of your career that you want to maybe emulate, or certain traits that you want to pick up, but don't be too rigid in that. And I think, and you can early in your career, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with moving around a bit. if you can explain why. We get, and it happens quite a lot, is that you like, I've been here for 1 year and I hate it, but I know it'll look bad on my CV if I don't stay here for 2. And I'm like, I promise you, if you stay here for 2, it'll look much worse than if you leave, because you clearly hate it.
Yeah.
And you don't, and you know, and so there's nothing wrong. I mean, of course, if somebody's been for 10 years and they've been in every role for 1,
issue.
Issue, exactly. It's different. But I think if somebody's curious and open and explains, there's nothing wrong with being ambitious too. Players are, and from our experience, the S&C guys, the senior performance people, the physio, they're just as ambitious, and they're in the performance space too. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with showing it, and being open about it. Some people will call us and say, "I'm quite happy here. I'm more than happy here to stay for a bit longer, but I know that for my career to develop, I probably need to think about my next step. And the gap I have is I haven't done this, and I haven't done it in this environment." So they're proactive about it. They're aware of their weaknesses, and they're quite humble. They know they haven't got all the answers. So
self-awareness again.
Knowing
what you don't know and know where the gap is. Yeah.
And the fact is, the further you go, the more senior you get, the less you realize you do know. There's more certainty when you're further down. And I think, I happened to have a conversation yesterday with somebody who would be a senior kind of physical performance guy who's gravitated into the leadership role. He's worked across different geographies, and it was just really nice. And that was one of those conversations of him calling and going, "What do you think?" And this guy is outstanding. And I know he is, because I know some of the athletes that he's coached as it happened. And you're like, but he was totally willing to learn, and he was curious about, for some reason, what I had to say, and it's just really interesting. The best people that tend to be like that is they want to learn, and they don't pretend to have all the answers. And I think if you can have that as a philosophy, I think there's a balance of you want to contribute as much as you learn, and you want to learn as much as you contribute. There's a balance there, which is there's an inevitable tension, but yeah.
So just coming on to wages, salaries, always a contentious issue in the performance coaching world. So there's multiple reasons why people think that performance coaches aren't remunerated how they should be, whether that be supply versus demand, whether that be lack of understanding from administration, an inability to be objective of whether someone's good or not. What's your view from coming from the other side, like I mentioned right at the start, coming from the organisation side? Why do you think that is from your experience and the people you've spoken to?
It's tough, isn't it? And it does seem unfair at a certain level. I guess there is a kind of certain supply and demand issue, in that there's plenty of people who are willing to take a job for less to get a chance. And, good for them, and fair enough. I think it's really interesting. We had a chat about this today, actually, because, we'd had a chat a couple of weeks ago, and it's something that does come up, and I think it's something that's mentioned quite a lot. And people are very passionate about this space, and they'd be possibly open to not be paid what they deserve or what they feel they deserve. But there is maybe an onus also on the industry to maybe, I don't know how to put this politely or concisely, is that the people who pay you, they don't understand the impact that you have. Okay. And if they did, they'd pay you more. So how often do you actually engage with the commercial arm or the business arm to explain that? And that might be not possible, but actually it is possible. And one of the roles that we've actually led on is there's very rarely a voice on the board for performance people. There's very rarely anybody who's got any background in it. We did a role recently for a Premiership rugby team of a non-exec board director, a board member, with a performance background, to help people understand the impact people have. And I think it's disgraceful is a strong word, but it's shocking, the disparity between coaches and some of the other performance staff, when arguably the physical performance staff or whatever it might be will have a bigger impact on performance than some of the coaches, and yet the disparity in pay is huge. And so I'd say that there might be something that needs to be done within the industry to fight for that bit. Ultimately, it lacks champions at the top level, and equally, there's a responsibility partly. And I don't want to sound. Please don't cut this. So this is the only thing that I say. But I think there is. We have seen a lot of people who are just grateful for having for doing something that they love, and so people are almost accepting of less, and people are passionate about the space. And yeah, there's a supply issue, and maybe there's always somebody who's willing to do it for less. But I'm amazed how often we've seen a situation where people will say they have a fixed budget, but when you go back with an argument of why somebody should be paid more, it can move, and people have found it. And so it's similar to I guess it is a similar issue to the point around people moving into consultancy space, and suddenly having to be their own CEO of their own business. People don't do it that well. I'm not saying that. Funny enough, some people do it very well, and you get people who suddenly are getting paid 20 times more than the practitioner one below them, and yet there's an onus on those people to pull up the rest of them below. And I think more people should do that, really. So I don't know. I'm just reflecting. That's not a direct answer, but it's not a simple issue. But I think the more representation of a performance person on a board could be something, of somebody just really understanding the disparity between certain coaching and some of these performance functions is wrong, arguably. So yeah, as I say, don't cut that to make that one statement look too controversial.
No. Already been done. Already noted.
Wonder what you do.
So, in terms of the people on the ground who are trying to have influence up the chain to the, like you said, the commercial business side of the organisation, what would be your tactic, or what would be your advice for? What would be the tactic you would advise? There we go. What would be the tactic that you would advise for people to do that effectively? Have you seen that been done well in the past?
Yeah, I'm not saying you should necessarily go to the top to do that.
Yep.
I think there's probably a kind of, not a chain of command as such, but there's probably a direct report that you can go to, or there's a head of function, there's a performance director of football, rugby, cricket, whatever it might be, that you can go and have the conversation with, and you can do your research and you can plan it. And I guess this does kind of rely on you being good at your job. So I think you still need to add value, and you still there's a German, I think it's a German phrase of like you're always the apprentice in your first company. So unfortunately, people who stay somewhere for a long time are underpaid. Yes. It's a fact across all industries.
Same with players.
So yeah. So you might have to move, and if you don't want to, there's a reality there. And I think, but knowing your value, knowing your worth, knowing the argument that you have for wanting to be paid more is important. As I say, I see quite a lot of people talking about it a lot. It does seem an issue that's out there all the time, and I wonder how proactive people are doing about changing it. And it's quite easy just to complain, and it's really tough. I can't believe sometimes what people get paid, and worse than that, you speak to somebody and you're just like, this person's amazing. He or she, they've worked post university, they've got masters, they've spent 2 years here, 3 years here, they've had a real impact, and they're still on 30 grand, and you're like, that seems wrong. Equally, some of those people are really happy, so pay isn't everything, but I don't have the answer clearly, but those are some thoughts.
So circling back, probably one of the last things we'll chat about before I let you get on with your evening. Them leadership.
Bake off to start in 45 minutes, so got to.
Does it? Okay, we'll round up. Yeah, don't worry. So them leadership management skills that you mentioned at the start, the non-technical, are they? And this is something that came up ages ago in the podcast that I'm thinking about. I can't remember who, but are they are they teachable? Can you learn them? Is it something that's inbuilt? You're either a leader or you're not. If they are, where would you direct people to actually develop them skills, which clearly are horrendously important because they're the 6 above the 3 technical that people need to be ticking to get on the magic list that we spoke about earlier.
It's not a magic list. It's not even a list. So I guess the first thing is they're absolutely learnable and teachable. And yes, way more people can be leaders than are. Not that everybody can. That's a myth. Of course they can't. And not everybody wants to be either. And it's totally fine if you don't. If you're brilliant at a certain skill and you love doing it, just keep doing it. Don't feel the need to gravitate. It's the classic best salesman moving to sales director and just being awful at it. So that's so common. And equally, there are people who it's not completely learnable and teachable. There are some people who do have a more natural style and are more naturally gifted at kind of being a leader. I believe that would be the case too, if you look at a lot of the literature. But what's come out of the academic literature, which only started on leadership really in the 60s, it's really a very new thing, and it's developed hugely from really initially coming from management and then kind of different types. And I think there's a much more thing about authentic leadership now and about the reality that you can be yourself. And it's funny, I'm actually doing an MBA at the moment, and I'd always thought of leaders as being leaders of a team. And actually that's only one type of leadership. The most important thing to start with is about leading yourself and about self-awareness again, but it's about thinking about yourself and about what type of person that you are. And the journey that kind of I've been on that is that you realize that, and this has kind of hit me like a sledgehammer really, but that the way people perceive you is not how you perceive yourself. And just that understanding of that kind of paradigm shift in your thinking is massive. And as soon as you recognize that, you can do something about it. And to our point that no one's more than 80% fit, simply the act of trying to get better makes you better anyway. And I think, and we see it all the time, the people who are curious, who ask questions, who want to get better, who want to, find out more. It's actually really infectious. If you see people like that, you want to kind of follow them. And that, one of the things is that leadership inevitably is one of the 6, but followership is 2. So being the type of person that somebody to create that followership in others, of somebody who wants to follow. Someone like a Gareth Southgate, I think, would be an outstanding example of that. It's not just about him; it's about people wanting to follow him. And you have your own style, and I think, and you're constantly learning about that. It's an evolution, and you're constantly getting to know yourself. And with more experience, doesn't necessarily mean you're better the older you become, but the more mature you get, the better. The second part of that question was, where do you go to get it? The great thing now, and partly it's quite good for us, is that education is changing. There is an opportunity now to do things online in a much more agile way. If you look at look at TED Talks, for example, you look at YouTube, you can actually, if you want to, obviously I'm doing an MBA, but you look at a lot of the work, you can still find stuff out. You can still get groups together you can do more bite-sized things now. There's a ton of stuff. I can't remember the names now, but we can get free online courses called Moves or something. So you get, there's tons of stuff you can do. And it's the biggest gap in sport, leadership. If you look at, people talk about culture a lot, people talk about kind of strategy and planning and talent and all the different, and they'll go into specialisms. They'll go into, you need this latest gadget, or you need, this style of play, or from our experience, the thing that separates the best from the rest is the teams that are the best led when it matters, when the pressure comes on. They kind of keep things tight and make sure people are aligned to what really matters. And the great thing is this is stuff that people can learn. Like, we've got no doubt about that. We've seen people develop hugely over the time that we've been doing this for 7 years. So I'd be very optimistic in that, is that way more people, not everybody can be the top leader, but you can lead from anywhere.
Cool. last question. And this comes from the Twitter post that I put out, and a really interesting one about agents. Agents branching out from players to technical coaches, coming down to the more rounded support around that head coach, and trying to potentially do what you do and get them jobs. Is that something that you're seeing more of? Is that a trend that's very visible, or is that something that's coming down the track a bit more in the future?
It's actually not. No, okay. We're not. We are seeing some people have them. We did a head of S&C role last year, and somebody did have an agent. But the reality is that in the way we work, if they're going to use a set, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have one, because those people might be able to get opportunities for you that don't get advertised because they know people within the club. So I'm not saying don't have one, but the way we work is we'll work with the club and they'll say, this is what we want, and they'll pay us, and then we'll go into the market and speak to those people directly. So there is no need, the role of the agent is kind of gone, because we're doing that role for them. We're the ones, and we're doing it against the criteria that they've decided with us. So we get the classic thing, and it would happen with coaching. Coaches have agents, and I guess some of the better ones would recognize the role that we would play, and that it's a classic thing of like, I've got four managers, 4 head coaches, they're all a perfect fit. And we're like, well, they're obviously not, because they're not all the same. And also, how do you know? Because you don't know what the brief is, because we haven't told anybody yet. And I think there is a role to play there. I'm not saying there's not a role for agents, but in the performance space, I question exactly how they might be able to help get you opportunities that you're not aware of, because clearly the role that we have, not that many people would use headhunters. We clearly think there's a huge value in it, and undoubtedly that there is. It's in every other industry in the world. There's a reason why it exists, but some people might do it directly. But no, we haven't seen it grow particularly. Occasionally there might be somebody who goes, you know what, I'm not getting any luck, I might just get an agent to see if they can find me something. And that's a personal choice, and arguably the right one for some people if they think that person can connect them with opportunities. But unlike players, you can actually just contact clubs yourself. But if those people can get to places quicker, it could make sense. The difficulty is when you might have a situation, and we have had it, where they say, don't talk to my client about salary or about, and I said, well, actually, my client is the club, so I am going to talk to him about salary because it's my job. I appreciate you have a job to do too, but it can't get in the middle of what we do. Or it can, but you're going to have to tell your client that you won't be on the shortlist. So it's kind of your choice. That sounds a bit aggressive, but that's kind of where it's a little bit different to players. And coaches is the grey area, but I'm not saying not to have one, but we're not saying it grow particularly.
Yeah. Cool. I think that answered that.
Great.
Thank you very much. We're now nearly
You're welcome.
10 in. We're
Great.
Plenty of time for Bake Off. But anyone,
plenty of time.
Anyone that doesn't, anyone that does want to reach out and have a chat or get to know more about what you do, where's the best places?
So in fact, we'll have a new website by the time I think you put this out, so you can connect through that. You kind of speak to a partner or connect with a partner. LinkedIn and Twitter I'm on. I'm probably on LinkedIn more than, but website or LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Stick around. Yeah. Stick around. We'll have a little chat after before I let you go for Bake Off.
Great.
But thank you,
Rob. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and actually thank you for all that you've done. I think you're doing a great job with this. Genuinely. So fair play. It's been great, and thank you. I mean, it's only taken you 7 years or whatever to get me on, but that's that's fine. That's fine.
No, thanks, mate. I appreciate the kind words. It's my pleasure. It's good to speak to people like yourself. So thank you very much.
Cool.
And
cheers.
We'll chat. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye bye.